Well, I'd like to start out with, for the fans who may be watching this, especially for the first time, how you kind of got into voice acting and where your career started, and a little kind of a recap for some of our fans.
A little history, yeah. I think I got to this career as a result of a misspent youth. I was one of those strange kids that grew up in south central Kansas, little dinky town, 7,000. And I was always one of those kids. There's not a whole lot to do in south central Kansas, so I watched a lot of TV, a lot of movies, and I was just drawn to animation, you know, the ones on Saturday morning. And seriously, I just switched back and forth between different cartoon shows on Saturday morning, and I found out that I could kind of do some of the voices, and I think some of my first ones were like Rocky and Bullwinkle, you know, and Dudley Drat of the Mountains, where's Little Nell, you know, on all of those, and of course Kermit the Frog. Very early on, I figured I could do, and you know, so I would just go to my parents and do these strange voices, and my dad really didn't get it. It was like something's wrong with him. And I never thought it would become a career. Through high school, I was the one that would kind of get in trouble for, you know, doing voices and imitating the teachers. And I remember once I got in a little trouble because the teacher was writing on the blackboard, and I was kind of going, you know, and they'd look around. Like, my friends love that stuff. Or driving through Burger King and, you know, ordering in weird voices. I'd like a Whopper with cheese, and Arnold would like a Coke. And they'd look out, and it just kind of became a fun thing. After high school, I went to the University of Kansas. Again, during band breaks, I was in a fraternity, and they'd have a band at parties. And people knew that I did impressions, and they at band breaks, band would take a break, and they said, "Farmer, get up and do something, man." So I'd have to get up, and I really didn't have anything to say. I'd do, you know, in those days I'd do a lot of Western stars, and all like John Wayne and Jimmy Store. I'd do all those voices, and I didn't really have much to say. So I started writing little bits of, you know, it's just so I'd have something to do when they'd call on me. After college, I kicked around in radio for a number of years and used those characters on air, where we would have like a rock and roll show, and I'd do Wolfman Jack. Oh baby, we bring that up. I didn't know anything about copyrights or anything like that. We just did it. And, you know, then I wound up in Dallas, Texas, and my life changed March 17th, 1982, when I went up on stage at a comedy club in Dallas and did a little 5-minute routine. It met with a lot of you know, applause and stuff, and that was kind of cool. And the house comic, a guy named Bill Engvall, who's gone on to great fame with you know, in the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, said, "You ought to try this. You ought to think seriously about doing it full time." I did. Within 6 months, I was traveling as a comic around Texas and other areas, and then I came out to, on the advice of an agent in Dallas, I came out to Hollywood in 1986, and as luck would have it, my first animated character audition was for Goofy. They said, "Do you do any of the Disney characters?" And I said, "Gosh, oh boy, you know, I can kind of do a Mickey, and Donald's tough, and that's all I can do, but gosh, Goofy was right in the wheelhouse." They hired me, and 3,500 programs later, I'm still doing it.
Thank you for that. That was a wonderful history story.
Your stand-up, how much of it incorporated impressions and how much of it was other material?
It was probably, I had kind of alternate material, because sometimes you'd get to a club that had a really bad sound system. So the impressions aren't going to work. I'd have observational things, you know, growing up in Kansas, talk about my wife a lot, and things like that, and just kind of observational comedy, but probably half of it was impressions. I probably did around 20 to 30 impressions in a typical set. And incidentally, very few were animated, and I never did Goofy back then. Not until I got the audition did I even really attempt to do Goofy.
A lot of people at that time, I guess, that were doing impressions were maybe, a lot of people were pointing them maybe to Chicago for Second City. Did that ever,
Yes.
was that ever a temptation, or?
Yeah, and we would have an improv night at our club in Dallas, but I just took the advice of this agent who said, give it a shot in Hollywood. With all the voices you do, maybe animation is the way for you to go. And as it turned out, they were spot on.
Ever any difficulty with either a character or the industry?
A difficulty, or, oh, there's always difficulties. I don't get hired enough. It's an interesting industry. It's very rewarding, and it can be terrifying at the same time. Most people think it's just going in and doing fun voices. It's a lot more than that. It is acting. As much as stage, as much as screen, as much as television, animation is acting. Whether or not there's a camera there is almost immaterial. You still have to emote. In fact, it's a little harder with voices because you can't rely on your face, you can't rely on gestures. It all has to come from there. That little voice box has to do the whole gamut of emotions, and you got to bring these characters to life with that. So I always tell people that want to get into this business, take acting, because it is.
Do you ever find yourself sometimes when you're reading, when you're talking about the acting part, does your hands get to go? Do you feel
Everyone
the whole
gets
thing?
into it.
Yeah.
Russi Taylor, who does Minnie Mouse, for some reason crosses her fingers when she does Minnie. That's her thing.
Yeah.
I get in a chair and microphone's here, and then I get in the Goofy and I kind of slouch because I figure his posture's like that. You feel like Goofy, and gorge, and then the engineer has to come move the microphone a little bit, get me on mic. So yeah, you kind of got to get into the skin of the character. You have to feel like the character. Different characters have different energy levels, and you have to feel that energy level. Goofy's kind of a slow, methodic, gorge, a lot of scoops and valleys in his voice, and you got to feel that kind of the music of the character. Some are faster. You do Bugs Bunny, it's, oh, brother, what's up, Doc, or something like that. It's very staccato. Other characters are, much more laid back, like Goofy, and Pluto, of course, it's, whoa, and then I go home.
When you work on trying to get a voice down that you're working on or you're auditioning for, or whatever, you're trying to get a doc, for example, when you jump in and step in the doc, how much time do you spend, when you talk about having to get to each place emotionally, is there something that you work on for each emotion? Is there something that you're dialoguing for each emotion? You see what I'm asking?
I think so. Doc, for example, you don't get much chance to do that when you are just auditioning. I got a one-page script, a picture of the character, what does this guy sound like, and a few sample lines. You have to kind of analyze from what they give you, what is this guy like? What would he sound like? Of course, Doc's little and short, kind of elfish, so you might take his voice a little bit higher. He's very intelligent and wears glasses, probably a pocket protector, so he probably speaks very articulately and a little bit, crisper, a little bit quicker. He's the smart one, so I figured he's probably kind of like an absent-minded professor. So you kind of put in a little bit of ADD, and look, a squirrel. Yeah. And he's off in different directions. You put that in, and there you've got an audition.
What about singing? Whenever do you prep differently when you know that there's going to be a little tune that your character has to?
Well, I've done about 20 to 30 Disney albums over the years, and every one of the musical directors at Disney, I say, should I take music lessons? I don't really read music that well. And he said, no, we don't want Goofy to sing great. It becomes not Goofy then. You don't expect him to sing great, so I've got the easiest singing career of all. I don't have to hit the key. Get close, but I don't have to be on key.
In your early days when you're learning the voice impressions, did it take you a long time to pick it up?
Depending on the voice. There are some characters, live action characters, like I mentioned Wolfman Jack, for some reason, that's kind of a very different voice from my own. So it's a placement voice. If you can do that kind of glottal grind is what that's called. Oh, baby, and you put on the southern accent, you're right there. There's a lot of other subtle ones. Johnny Carson, that I used to do a whole thing in my act where I would come out as Karnakin, if you remember those old things. The following question I have not seen the answer to. The answer is Donald Duck. And the question, what do you say to a Disney character during a drive-by shooting? Donald Duck, you know. But there's a lot of little nuances in that voice, and that took a long time to learn. So it totally depends on what the voice is as to how long it takes to get it down.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You go to the Disney parks a lot.
Mhm.
What's your favorite ride?
I like, I think at Disneyland, still Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a nice long one, and it's just really immersive, and it's one of the last ones that Walt worked on when he was there. Haunted Mansion, those are my two favorites, the newer ones. Of course, Indiana Jones, I like the fast ones, Space Mountain, Star Tours. Those are kind of the fast ones. Walt Disney World, Rock and Roller Coaster, and Tower of Terror are my favorites.
What, not the Barnstormer?
Well, of course, I love that. I love that as well. But no, I like the full-blown, scary ones.
Any other questions? No?
How often does someone come along in the mainstream, whether they're on TV, in a TV show or movie, you hear their voice and you think, all right, I got to figure out how to do that one?
It's less than it used to be. In the golden age of Hollywood, everyone had a voice that had a handle to it. I was watching an old movie the other day, like a Maltese Falcon. So I was kind of getting the Humphrey Bogart. He had that kind of lisp that went along with his voice. Peter Lorre, who had that very kind of strange little German voice. And you just kind of can get them easier. There's more handles to it than there are today. What would Brad Pitt sound like? There's nothing to grab onto. There's more character in those old movies. So if you hear one today and it has a handle, yeah, you'll get it. I mean, of the ones today, I probably haven't practiced as much as I used to, but there's not as many today. It's much harder.
Politicians, maybe.
Politicians are usually pretty good. The presidents are always good. Well, I'm back. It's nice to be here, Get out there, honey. I'm having a good time. So you can do all of those things. I usually tell people I vote for whoever I do the best impression of, because that's job security for me.
With animation, Disney, everything's changed the past 10, 15 years. What do you feel like is the biggest change for voiceover in the industry?
Well, there was a lot of, when I started, there was ensemble recording. When we did this series, my first series, Goof Troop, everyone was in a room, same time. We did it like a radio play. We read it, we were bouncing off each other, and you get that the input from the other actors, which helps you talk to someone. Now, almost all the stuff that I do is solo. I go in, I do my lines as Doc, they'll do Grumpy's lines later, they mix it together in post-production and editing. That's a little more difficult and not as much fun because I don't get to play with my friends as much. I see them in the lobby, they'll go in, do their lines, they're coming out, hey, how you doing? Okay, I gotta go do my lines. And you rely on the director a lot more. I don't know how far away Mickey is. If Mickey's, gosh, howdy Mickey, or howdy Mickey, you have to rely on the director so much for all of that input, because all you have is a page, and unless it says Mickey's 50 feet away, you don't know.
Interesting. You don't think about that because the characters can change and
Yeah, if
fluctuate
you're on a
so
stage,
much.
you know he's right there. You
Yeah.
speak in that manner.
Yeah.
But it's all out there if you're doing. It's kind of like a lot of movie acting now with green screen. The monster's a tennis ball on the wall or something. You got to react to that. You just have to do it in your mind in front of a microphone in animation. Then they draw the monster later.
You'd be the life of the party if you went to your friends' parties. You could do all their voices.
Oh yeah. I've been invited to a lot of parties because of what I do. Okay, give me more drinks. Give me more drinks. He'll loosen up. He'll start doing voices and stuff.
Okay, so I'll embarrass my nephew. Showed me a question. He said, "So, did your voice ever help you pick up any women?"
Goofy doesn't for some reason. I don't know why.
It was
It's so
cute.
funny. That is a question. Yeah, no, humor is always fun. Yeah, in those days, yeah. I certainly used humor a lot and voices if they're into that. People ask my wife all the time, does he use voices when he's romantic? And so, if I could do Chris Hemsworth, that'd be great.
You could have
And I
scared the
could-
women off with those
I know,
voices
that's
those
that's
days.
true. If I come in and I'm doing Sling Blade or something, hey honey, how you doing there? That's over for That just ruins a good relationship. So it can work both ways, depending on the character you're doing.
Do you
You're
use-
more Sean Connery.
What about telemarketers? Do you use it on them?
That's a good one.
Yeah, you can, what did you say? No, you can just do anything on the phone and just or
You have to try it.
yeah, there's a few times that I have actually used voices on, and just kind of just play dumb, Well, what does this thing do? Oh, yeah. Does it have a trunk? Now they're selling insurance. What kind of, you can just run them around in circles for an hour if you want to. You never know. I wanted a pizza, You never know.
All right, I think we're good. Time
Do you have a favorite goofy cartoon that you're not voicing from before your time?
Oh yeah, I love the 1930s, and I based Goofy in my audition on the 1930s boat builders, Lonesome Ghosts, because I always like ghosts and Halloween and stuff like that. So Lonesome Ghosts, boat builders, clock cleaners, that era in the classic Goofy of that time is what my default Goofy is. And that's interesting because we've changed Goofy over the years several times. In Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, he's much more, you got to talk to the 5-year-olds and under. And the new Mickey Mouse shorts we're doing, we kind of taken him back to his 1930 roots, and he's a little bit more rural, a little dumber, if you will, not quite as smart. In a Goofy movie, he had to become a nurturing father. He had to have a lot more emotions than he ever did before. He had to worry about Max, that Max was getting in trouble, and still keep him goofy. And so those are the fun challenges you have as an actor, is to how to put those in without compromising the integrity of the character.
What is his actual name? Because it's been several names. His full
Well,
name.
it was originally Dippy Dog with D-A-W-G, so that's, people always ask, is he a dog? I guess he is if you spell it D-A-W-G. And then it was Dippy the Goof, and then Goofy, and then Mr. Geef, George Geef in the 50s, and then back to Goofy from the 1980s on when I took it over. So it's still, even Goofy Goof, I've seen it written, that is his full name. I like it just like Cher, it's like Goofy. He only needs one name.
This is true.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We're
Thank you.
Thank you so
Gosh, it
much.
was my pleasure.
Great interview.